Welcome to the Gen Mess with Tess, where we're not just fixing the mess, we're figuring out how to live in it. I'm your host, Tess Brigham. So let's start making sense of the mess together. So today on the show, I am joined by Corrine Ishio, founder of My Working Soul. Corrine works with founders and leadership teams in fast-growing companies to help them focus on something that often gets overlooked when businesses scale quickly: the humans. Because what we see again and again is that companies grow fast, hiring becomes reactive, culture stays a little fuzzy, and suddenly the very people who helped you build the company start feeling misaligned or disengaged. So Corrine helps leaders step back and think more intentionally about the human side of growth, right? How do you hire with clarity instead of just vibes? How do you define a culture where people actually live in? So I can't wait to ask all these questions. Thanks so much for being here on the Gen Mess.
Thank you so much, Tess. I'm happy to be here.
Yeah. So I want to hear your story, right? What was the path that led you to doing this work?
Absolutely. And for me, it definitely starts with my parents. Because I am on your podcast, of course, Tess, I'll start off by saying I'm a card-carrying millennial, one of my favorite phrases. And both of my parents are Gen Xers. So that's a little bit of our generational landscape. And I really like to start off with talking about my parents because, spoiler alert, they are the reason why I'm here. But beyond that, I got a lot of inspiration from both of them. They were both very entrepreneurial. I was always encouraged as a child to use my voice, to ask questions, and to be respectful. No matter what type of culture I was encountering, to be respectful. And so really, present day, how that led me to my work today. My parents were a little younger when they had me. And I had the blessing as a child growing up, witnessing their growth and witnessing their own transformation as human beings as well. And, it's interesting when I'm telling people about my working soul and what I do for a living, I often consolidate it by saying I'm in human resources, I'm in HR. That seems to be the catch-all term that most people understand. But really, the value that I'm bringing to my world and my community around me is in talking to folks about what it means to be human, what it means to be human in the context of growth, and really the immense opportunity that HR has as we move into a new era of work is supporting leaders, entrepreneurs, employees as we know it, in communicating and how to foster relationships that respect all parties.
Mm-hmm. So was there a moment for you where you're like, wait a second, this isn't working anymore?
Yes, that's a lovely open-ended question. I relish, Tess. Thank you. So when you say like this isn't working anymore, I'm thinking work, but what were you thinking?
I was thinking work too, but then the minute it came out of my mouth, I was like, oh, maybe it was for her too. I was like, maybe I want to know both. But I was really thinking about it in terms of, right, you've worked at all these fast-paced jobs and industry and growth companies, right? And so I was just curious about what behind the scenes made you want to focus on, culture and talent.
Yes, absolutely. I'll answer it from both ends.
Okay.
On the personal side, in terms of culture and talent, I have been so blessed to grow up in California, surrounded by diversity. And I myself grew up in a multicultural household on both sides of my family as well. So I was always looking at culture operating under the definition of way of life. And so there's so many different cultures beyond just the different continents that we all know. Culture means way of life. And that's something that we're even doing together right now, Tess. So that's part of the reason why. I also grew up in a church. So I learned very early on how to engage people through conversation, how to be caring, how to express myself and show concern and care for other people. So it was just like a second skin for me growing up, being inquisitive about the world around me. I'm also a voracious reader. I love to read. And so just taking those trips into other characters' heads and thinking about how other people felt and experienced the same world that I experienced, and how it's different, how it's the same. That was always something that I was thinking about. So that's like my esoteric personal reasons
Mm-hmm.
why. And on the professional end, let me ask you first, Tess, like, what's your idea of HR? How do you define it?
Yeah, I mean, it's so funny because I've been working for myself for a while, so I haven't really had to deal with HR. But in my mind, it was always like this. I always saw it as this bridge between the employees and the higher ups, right? Like they were our mouthpiece, and every company that you go to, what HR means to them is different, right? Because sometimes it's, oh, this is who does our payroll. This is who, right? This is who signs you up, or this is what gets you, enrolled in whatever plan we're doing right now, or whatever that is. And then there's other places where, and I've certainly met a lot of these people where no, they're very much there for culture and other things. I will say that when I was younger, in my 20s in the professional years, it was mainly we're doing the payroll, we're doing this, right? Like my where's my check kind of place. There was not a lot of talk about are you happy? There were no if you had a conversation about career, you may have it once a year here and there, but not like it is today. It wasn't an ongoing conversation.
Wow, yes. And I agree with you, Tess. I think most people, when they think of HR, sometimes it's a hopeful attitude about
Mm-hmm.
HR will be my support system or they're going to help me. But unfortunately, a lot of the stories and experiences that I hear tend to be, I thought that HR was going to support me, and I just found
Mm-hmm.
out they were only here for the company. Um, and it's interesting. I think that as someone who is in HR and has been in this career for over 10 years now, it's sad that HR professionals themselves also go through their own turmoil of holding both hands, is what I call it.
Mm-hmm.
Trying
Mm-hmm.
to be humane and be there for the people, but also knowing that they are businesses and ultimately who pays them is the company. Um,
Mm-hmm.
so that's, in terms of like HR, I started on the headhunting side. So I was all about the hiring, really
Mm-hmm.
high energy, probably the most, sales oriented, I guess you could say, aspect of HR. I have processed payroll. I can do payroll. Is it my favorite thing? No. But, a lot of being in HR is being a team player because often, depending on the size of your company,
Mm-hmm.
you might only have one person who's responsible for everything, which is pretty tough. Or you have really large companies where HR is this like huge machine with very specialized functions. Um, and it's interesting, like for you, Tess, throughout your entire career, have you experienced more of that like team of one HR, one person who you at least had a relationship with, or have you experienced like the HR machine, or maybe a version of both?
Well, I personally, I've had kind of a weird situation because I worked in, Hollywood, LA, that kind of thing. And so the first place I worked with, there were three of us. So there was no HR. There was none of that. So I was very used to working in these, and then I worked for one woman, and like I was very used to working in like these very small environments where it was myself and my boss and maybe one other person. So I never had to deal with that. And then, I worked at this mid-size agency when I was in LA, and it was like, yeah, she was one person. She did everything. So it wasn't until I started working at these larger companies, as I got older, that I saw it a bit more. But I'm not, my experience after that is then I went to grad school. So for me, when I started coaching, and I started coaching people that worked in at these big companies and big tech companies, I did feel a bit of this imposter syndrome because I was like, well, I don't know what that's like. And then once I heard everything, I was like, oh, okay, I got it. I understand it now. But it's a very different dynamic when you are a group, right? You're a mid-size company where pretty much everyone knows who the HR team is versus, right, this nameless, faceless person.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And it's so interesting because I'll put on my headhunter hat for a little bit. When I've hired for various HR positions in the past, the profile, the type of person that will do well in a particular role, it varies drastically. The person who's in payroll is very different than maybe the person who's handling legal compliance versus
Mm-hmm.
the person who's the recruiter. Um,
Mm-hmm.
and when you have just one person who's responsible for all of those functions, it's just inevitable. Like nobody can be all of those things at once without having, some sort of dysfunction, I'll say internal dysfunction,
Mm-hmm.
having to play all of those roles. Um, and it's interesting because I've been a team of one in
Mm-hmm.
HR. And yeah, it's interesting. Like, you really have to have a heart for the people because the one commonality, even though all of those tasks are so different, is if you're really someone who cares about the human beings and you care about
Mm-hmm.
relationships, that actually creates a different type of role completely. Like, and I'll use myself as an example. I do not love doing payroll, mostly because it's just like I'm a perfectionist. So I feel the need to check it like 8 times and I can feel
Mm-hmm.
my heart pumping like every time I check. But the way that I was able to mitigate that when I was in that position needing to do it is I'm thinking, wow, well, it's really important that people get paid. I
Mm-hmm.
really, really understand the purpose of why it's important that I get this right. And, it actually gives me an opportunity to maybe see some inefficiencies in this process, such as,
Mm-hmm.
are people picking up their paycheck? Do people know all of those different deductions from their paycheck, what that means to them, why that's
Mm-hmm.
happening? In a broader sense, are people thinking about their goals and what finances they'll need to support those goals? Do they
Mm-hmm.
see growth in the organization? So then it becomes much more than just processing a piece of paper, and you start to really look at those people, those humans, as I'm really making a difference in their life. And this is why I'll sit here and get a little
Mm-hmm.
bit nervous doing the payroll. So, that's my number underscore when I am hiring for HR, or even when I'm just operating as a consultant myself. Where is the human in whatever we're talking about? That's really the
Mm-hmm.
part that I'm interested in focusing on.
Got it. So, because I was going to ask about the title of your company, My Working Soul. Like, what made you, it's an interesting phrase, like, what made you pick that? I mean,
Yes.
is it, so my interpretation was this, that it was my working soul, meaning that it had a couple different meanings of my soul's working, right? And what do I want to do? Or this is, is this working for my soul? I mean, I think you can look at it in a lot of different ways.
Yes,
Is that
absolutely.
the intention?
Yes, I'm gonna cough really quickly. Excuse me. But I love Tess that you bring that up.
Mm-hmm.
I'll take you behind the scenes of like functionally how that name arose,
Yeah.
and then progressively what it's meant to the growth of the company and our clients over time. So as I mentioned at the top of our conversation, I am a card carrying millennial.
Mm-hmm.
I was there for the advent of what we know as MySpace. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
Maybe, hopefully, some of your listeners are familiar with that. But it was really like the beginning of an era, MySpace, in terms of just like as someone who was just entering high school at the time, this concept of my possessive
Mm-hmm.
space. And at that time in the world, we were undergoing a digital revolution like no other, social transformation, really, where so much of the tangible, the real, was becoming virtual. Um,
Mm-hmm.
and so this claiming of space, literally my space, I get to put my skin on my profile. I get to create a playlist, and I can even hide that playlist using HTML, so you have to listen to my music. Um,
Mm-hmm.
this like phenomenon of having a top four or a top eight, I experienced that.
Mm-hmm.
And so like I started to really think about that possessive pronoun of my,
Mm.
and what that meant to my generation in particular.
Mhm.
And really all generations, because even going to Gen X, another amazing revolution into the internet. So
Mhm.
really claiming, and then working soul, at the time, as a lot of creative acts are, it was pretty unconscious. Like, it just seemed to come out of me. But there were periods in building this company where I felt I'm constantly working towards something. I'm still growing. I'm still
Mhm.
developing. So it's also this idea of discovery,
Mhm.
and figuring things out. What that meaning has progressed to, now that we're a company that's been here for 5+ years, yay! It's really describing this form of a genome, in terms of,
Mhm.
like, Tess, your working soul. What is that? It's that purpose that drives you to
Mhm.
do the work that you do. And our flagship product is called My Working Soul. And we have this tool called the Human Purpose Tool that gives people the direction and says, listen, this is
Mhm.
what your purpose is in this new era of work. And we take that one step further because we're actually hiring for clients. So this isn't me just creatively telling you necessarily what your purpose is. It's also me as
Mhm.
a headhunter saying, these are the new roles and the new types of opportunities that are arising today, titles that you might not have ever heard of before, because they're
Mhm.
just emerging. And this is how your unique skills coincide with what the world needs, what you can monetize, what you're passionate about. This is how you go after what your greatest purpose is. That's
Mhm.
my working soul.
Yeah, I love that with the this idea of working ing, like practice. It's practicing because we're always getting there. We're always, moving forward. So before I do want to talk about the generations, but before we get into that, I'm curious of why is it? Because you mentioned that you had worked at a lot of fast-paced companies, and that what was happening was like hiring was happening quicker than culture was really shifting. And so I guess I'm curious of what do you think that is? Why do organizations struggle so much when they have this vision, they have this mission, this purpose, and then it's there we go, we're doing it, and then something goes off the rails. And I do believe that it's never anyone's intention, like it's never their intention, but it seems like there's always this issue with the perfect formula of culture, I guess, is it's a hard thing to know,
Yes,
right?
that's a fantastic question. And so many stories are emerging,
Yeah.
from the HR side of me. And, I would say in the shortest form I can, the self, the identity is constantly changing. It's a dynamic construction when
Mm-hmm.
it's constructing oneself. And when you're in the hiring moment, in a way, it's like reproduction. You're
Mm-hmm.
trying to give birth to maybe not another version of you, especially if you're the founder or a certain type of leader. It's not that you're trying to reproduce a carbon copy of yourself, but what's so interesting about human psychology, and I see it a lot as a recruiter, is people tend to be unaware of their own bias. Everyone has a
Mm-hmm.
blind spot. And so I might tell you, Tess, I am XYZ, and this is the way that I work. And, I'm so self assured that I'm this type of way, and I'm a pretty nice person. And then the part where that tends to break down is self awareness and also communication. I might
Mm-hmm.
really be that nice of a person and really that marvelous and fun to work with. But if I don't have communication systems set up in place and I'm not checking in with another person's lived reality, it doesn't
Mm-hmm.
matter if I see myself this way, that person sees me another way. And
Mm-hmm.
so that's, we're describing a microcosm of self at this point. But again, with an organization, that's dynamic. The more people you add, the more challenging it becomes to on the spot define what your identity is. Then there
Mm-hmm.
becomes either the democratic or despotic
Mm-hmm.
application of who gets to tell the story and who is in charge of the messaging. And
Mm-hmm.
that's why with My Working Soul are two products, My Working Soul, My Working Business, because we start with a leader and we say, let's find out who you are and what your purpose is and put that into language so it's front and center. And once we've done that, let's take that language and recruit with that and hire with that intentionality in mind. And humans
Mm-hmm.
are humans. It's not like, I can guarantee you that when you hire this way, that person you find is never going to have a bad day, or that they might, never change and they're just going to in perpetuity be a check off and you're done.
Mm-hmm.
It's a dynamic relationship. And this is what makes humans so unique. And ultimately, this is what differentiates humans from machines.
Yes, it is very much so. So, what do you think? Do you have an idea or a definition of what a healthy workplace looks like? If everything's the culture, everything's moving exactly as it should be?
That's Tess, I love your line of questioning. You're
Well,
like me.
I ask questions for a living.
Like me, you're a problem solver. So we're getting to the heart of it.
Yes, yes.
Yeah. And, healthy in and of itself is a very fraught word. If we were to
Yeah, it's true.
transpose that to like what health means in Japan, or what health means in
Mm,
the Philippines, or what it means in Argentina versus the United States, that's where it becomes very different. Like, for example, um, I'll use Japan as an example in this case. In Japan, there's a different set of verbs for talking about oneself and one's family compared to talking about others and their families. There's
mm,
different verbal conjugations for who you're speaking to, how close you are in the relationship. And that's very different than American culture, where we believe in saying hi, and
yeah.
and that's what's healthy to us, is being
Mm-hmm.
authentic. So part of the nature of me working with so many global teams, I'm based here in San Diego, California. I'm here in the US, but a lot of teams and founders rely on me to be the bridge between their culture and US culture.
Mm,
And I'm
mm-hmm.
always taking the approach of defining, like, what does it mean to be healthy? Well, for a company, we have to start with the founder, what their values are, what their objectives are, and harmonizing that in a way that's going to support the business and the individual. And it's going
Mm-hmm.
to actually screen out a lot of people. There's going to be a
Mm-hmm.
lot of people when you go through this definitions process that are not going to make that cut for you. But it means that the people who do exit that type of funnel are going to be very aligned to you. But
Mm-hmm.
alongside of that, you need to have a continuous practice of, are we on the same page? It's just like in yoga. You never feel like, oh, well, I'm perfectly flexible. Now I'm done. It's like there's going to be some days where you can't touch your toes. Um,
Mm-hmm.
but it's the communication and the building the relationship that's really important. And Tess, I'd love to bring you in as a generational expert here.
Yes.
What have you observed, and what are your insights on, this is very broad, but communication distinctions between the various
Mm-hmm.
generations at work today?
Yeah, and it's you're putting me on the hot seat. I'm going to have to answer questions myself. But I think going back to bias, which is something that, if you listen to the show regularly, I talk about a lot, which is the generational stuff. It's bias. That's it. It's just this, you see someone, you see the age, you put everything together. Um, and I think what's so hard about what's happening now is that not, it's in some ways, if all of the leaders were, how do I explain this? It's like there was almost, back when it was millennials entered the job market, it was almost this, because this was all new, there was almost this idea of like, ugh, millennials, right? Like, oh, bad all around, and, not workable, and, all of those things. And what I'm seeing with Gen Z is I'm seeing it's much more of a mix. I think some of it is leaders are usually these people's parents. So we're seeing a little bit like they understand Gen Z because they're raising them. But it's your own kids, so it's always hard to see. But what I'm seeing is that there's some, that it's like there's some people that really get the younger generation, what they're like, what's going on with them, what's happening, and then there's other people that you're just like, we just had this pandemic, Didn't you think at all about what what was going on. And I think a lot of it comes back to how much do you think about other people's experiences? Do how often do you stop and empathize and think, okay, this is what this would be like for this person? And I think that's a big one. I think the people that stopped and thought about what it would be like to be in college or high school during the pandemic are really able, that's what I find, are able to kind of make the leap and able to see that. I think the other ones that didn't even think about it at all or didn't care because it didn't affect them, which is fine. For them, they're just plowing through, going along. I had such an interesting conversation with someone the other day about, he came to this country, he's from Brazil, got a master's degree here and he's working. And the thing is, his English, the English is not great. He took I always say MCATs, but it's the GMAT. He took the GMAT in English. Like his native language is Portuguese. So, that is amazing to me, like after all that. So anyway, and so, yeah, his English he's working on it. But the thing is that he has this perception that everyone at work thinks he's an idiot because of the accent. He feels like people are looking at him because and he'll try to use American expressions, but he'll get them wrong and everyone will laugh. And I think he got that, like, yeah, I know I said it wrong, but it's that it's a new job. So he's very self-conscious about how am I being perceived. And it's been very interesting because when I talked to him, I was like, wait a second, hold on. You came to another country, didn't know like learned a second language. Like that's incredibly impressive. All of that's very impressive. So I think so much back to that perception, right? Do I see, am I able to see you and recognize that it's not just about how we're struggling to communicate, but why are we struggling to communicate? And, I know that just went on a tangent, but that really struck me. And he had mentioned that some people really got it, like some people, teachers and other people like that he meets, and that other people just have no idea, like don't even think about it at all, about what it would be like to come to this country and not speak the language.
Wow. And I don't find that tangential at all. I think that's a dynamic representation of what it means to communicate one's identity. And what I hear in that story is he's integrating in all real terms into what he perceives to be American society and culture. And yet, as fellow Americans, Tess, I mean, you and I, if we sat here and defined what does it mean to be an American, would it be the sayings that we use? Would it be whether or not we had taken a test? Or would it be this persistent, and some might call it foolish belief that anything is possible, even the American dream? And you do not have to be an American citizen to believe in that. I think, part of the generational lens on it is the fragmentation of culture itself. I'm going to put a star next to social media as being a huge force in that conversation of defining what culture means today. And I would also say one of the conversations that I was having this week, and I'm always interacting with mostly people that are older than me, frankly, in Gen X and in the Boomer generation as well. And I was talking with a wonderful gentleman, and he actually, when I asked him, like, oh, well, what do you think about the different generations today and how they work? He answered, I'm used to working with a lot of different age groups that are different than me. Earlier in my career, and this is someone who's a boomer, he says, earlier in my career, I was always the youngest one. And I had to learn how to work with this older, silent types of folks. So that's a dimension I had never heard before. Like, what's your insights? If we go off of the hotbed of like Gen Z and millennial and boomers, which is what everyone wants to talk about, how do you see the preceding generations on which we have more data, we have more time and history to analyze that in? What's your view?
Well, yeah. And I think that the issue is because it makes me laugh when I see everything that the media is talking about with Gen Z is the exact same things they said about the millennials. Exactly the same. It was the same thing. They don't understand. They don't do this. And then if you go back even farther, it's not on social media. It's not so present, but you can find articles and news pieces talked about my generation, Gen X, that we were a mess, that we were, because baby boomers had stopped a war and we didn't care about those things and all of you, right? So I think there's always a through line with youth. Like there's always a through line with youth of how we perceive youth. And again, I think this is the part that is, in some ways, it feels very, it feels, we don't cut people a lot of slack for this, because one of the things, right, as you get older, the more and more you realize is when you're looking back on your life, you're looking back and you're trying to figure out, you're looking at these significant things that happened to you and what does it all mean, and you're creating the meaning. And one of the things that's very easy to get stuck into is, oh my God, why did I stay with that person? Or why did I stay at that job? Or like, why didn't I say yes to this or that? And so much of that is you cannot live there, because the reality is that you can only make decisions based on what you know in the moment. And that's one of the things about being young that's really hard is you don't have a lot of data. You don't have a lot of data. You don't have a lot of, understanding of yourself. So yeah, you're going to make a lot of decisions that are like, what does that mean? But again, it comes back to how does that older generation see that? Because I think a lot of times, again, like the person who's from Brazil, it's almost like we operate based on what we're seeing right in front of us, right? Like this person's young, they're not doing the thing that I want them to do, or they're I told them to show up for this meeting and they're calling in from Zoom, or their camera's off, or whatever it is. And I think all of that other stuff goes by the wayside, and so people just like focus on this is who's right in front of me, and this young person, or this is they don't know what they're doing.
And thank you for expanding on that, Tess, because I would ask that person who is I'm going to use the word judging
Yes.
millennials or Gen Z or the youth just in general. What is your intention behind that judgment? I would ask that person. Is your intention because you're concerned and because you love the youth and you want the best for them? Is it coming from insecurity because you are no longer at that place in your existence and perhaps you want to be? Is it coming from, maybe more broadly, like something more compassionate, or is it coming from a place that's sinister? What's your instinct with that?
I think it just comes from a lack of awareness. I really don't see it as sinister at all. I don't really see that, because I've talked to enough groups of people who at the beginning of the talk were like, oh God, you're going to tell me about millennials. Great. And by the end, they're like, oh, whoa. Yeah, that's right. Yeah. I mean, so I find that just simply people just understanding, like really just, and that's what I try to do with, when I go into companies or when I give a talk about the generations, is really just, I just want you to understand and just put yourself, like, stop, take yourself out of your life, put yourself into their life. Okay. So now this is how they see things. How would you, this is the mentality they have going in. It doesn't mean with Gen Z, it doesn't mean that, you let them off the hook. I think that's the fear is with when you talk about the generations is, are we always letting the young people off the hook? Are we always saying, well, we just need to accommodate them? And it's like, no, but we do need to listen. And we do need to, because they are young and this is all new, we do need to guide them. And I think that's the part that has been, I feel like, really missing. I mean, I know that Gen Z asks for a lot more. I mean, this was the thing with millennials, because millennials started this, like the career conversations that you all started all that. And so I see now with Gen Z, right, they're asking less about career and more about their purpose. Like what's my purpose? What's happening? And so I would love to hear from you, like what your take is on what, mainly if you agree, do you agree that this is what's happening? That is Gen Z Is it more about purpose, or do you see something else?
Great framing, Tess. Thank you so much. And I would say, whenever possible, I try to remove labels from
Mm-hmm.
people. That's part of me being a hiring expert. I, of
Mm-hmm.
course, am also a human and I have bias. And so in my hiring process, I create a copious report on any person that I talk to, and I purposely remove the pronoun I. Um,
Mm-hmm.
there's different strategies that I use to remove myself as much as possible. Um, and so if I were to practice that in our conversation today, right, even though we know there's certain stereotypes that are applied to all of these different groups, um, I would really say that let's look at the world that's affecting all of us right now.
Mm-hmm.
That's something that we all have in common. It's 2026, and we are
Mm-hmm.
entering into a new era of work, the AI revolution. It's
Mm-hmm.
very difficult to compare this to anything, but I think some of the most apt comparisons are going to be to the Industrial Revolution because that's the
Mm-hmm.
scale of the transformation. Um, and if we equalize everything along those lines and just say our entire society is transforming, that idea of like, what's the purpose of my work becomes a lot more clear for all of us to say,
Mm-hmm.
well, this like rote retention and memory and being analytical in a sense, which is what a lot of the American education system has encouraged over the last 50
Mm-hmm.
years. We no longer really need those skill sets in that way anymore because we have AI to call everything that we would need into being. AI
Yeah.
has an infinity capacity to be able to retain memory and bring you the results. So, the
Mm-hmm.
biggest skill that becomes the most important, no matter what age you are, is creativity and out of the box thinking.
Mm-hmm.
And so analyzing the purpose of what you're doing, whether you're 50 or 15, becomes so important because if we don't care about the purpose, let's just automate it and we
Yeah.
won't waste anything by automating it. So, like, my quick answer to that is I think it's actually a function of what the entire world is doing. And I
Mm-hmm.
will say, I think that, the youth are just a little bit more honest and maybe a little bit
Mm-hmm.
less guarded, and they're willing to say, I don't know. And that becomes trickier for people sometimes the more knowledge that they accumulate. But what I
Mm-hmm.
always ask myself and remind myself is this knowledge, is this information, or is this wisdom? And I don't
Mm.
always know the answer, but it's that
Yeah.
act of awareness that's really important.
Yeah. No, I like that. Is it knowledge or is it wisdom? Because sometimes they're the same, right? And sometimes they no, this is just your life experience. It's just your wisdom, your thoughts. And it's very wise, but it's not necessarily right what is real and true or what I need or right?
It's a
What is.
bias. It's
Yeah.
subjective at the end of the day.
Um so I had a thought, but now it's gone. This is what happens when you get to be older is you have all these thoughts and then they go away. Okay. So in from your perspective, do you believe that younger people, younger employees are harder to manage today?
Well, I really like that question. It's so direct. It's interesting. I wish I could give you a simple answer to that, but I'll tell you two stories
Okay.
instead. Um, I hired for my own company, my own team at a point, and I hired people that were on opposite ends of the spectrum in terms of their ages. There was someone who
Mhm.
was a Gen Xer, and then there was someone who was in Gen Z. And even that idea of like easier to manage, well, it really depends on your capacity as the
Mhm.
teacher, and also it depends on what they're willing to receive. I've found that Gen Z is very open to receiving. They're very good listeners. They take in an incredible amount of information.
Mhm.
But at times, I'm not 100% certain how they feel about it. Like I'm really, as a millennial, I craving their feedback.
Mm-hmm.
And they're so, I think it's a function of social media having this performative nature of I need to be
Mm-hmm.
perfect. I need to show up beautifully. If I'm not feeling well, I can say that to a camera, but I don't know how to say that to a human being face to face. So I find myself fretting a lot more
Mm-hmm.
over Gen Z. And that's more something in myself because I'm afraid that they're intimidated or they don't know or haven't been trained how to speak up. So in
Mm-hmm.
that sense, I'm putting a lot more time into managing them.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas, with Gen X, and these are all stereotypes, of course, it
Yeah.
doesn't mean that everyone in the generation is this. But with Gen X, what I found was, I spoke to that person as I do with everyone about what their motivations were, how much money they wanted, what they wanted to accomplish in their life. And I got very quick and straightforward answers. This
Mm-hmm.
person seems to know themselves. They've lived a few decades, so
Yes.
they're going to tell me straight out. But I felt that there was sometimes, a lack of receptivity to receiving new information. And then it would
Mm-hmm.
become, I hesitate to use the word antagonistic, but sometimes it would be antagonistic. And usually for that person, I'm younger than them because I'm a
Mm-hmm.
millennial. So there's even that dynamic of trying to guide someone who has more years on this planet than I do.
Mm-hmm.
And again, I'm going to spotlight my bias, which is
Mm-hmm.
I have immense familiarity with a Japanese cultural context in which you must express deference to those that are older than you.
Mm-hmm.
So I found it actually really difficult to tell that Gen Xer what to do because it was conflicting with my need to be respectful. Did that?
Mm-hmm.
So for
Yeah.
me, yeah, it's
No.
kind of mixed bag.
Yeah. And that's the other part of it too, is when we think about the leaders, yeah, they are all walking in with their own beliefs and perceptions of all these things. When you were talking about that, it's reminds me a lot of like I have a hard time pushing back against my sister because she's older. Like I have right? Because even though I'm 52, she's 56, like we are, but when we are together, it very much like we fall into these places. And yeah, and I had to again, I'm a therapist. Like I had to stop and recognize like, why am I scared? Like I'm just used to this, but I think that these things that are very ingrained in what we were taught, because growing up, I was taught like, listen to your sister, she's in charge. So, all right, she's in charge. So that's what we're going to do. But it's so everyone's bringing that stuff to the table as well. Everyone's bringing all of their stuff all the time. And that's the part I think with culture that is so tricky and I think frustrates people is again, it's like this living organism that's constantly evolving and moving like all relationships. And that that goes against our humanness. That's just way too much uncertainty because that's just too much uncertainty. So I feel like we're constantly battling between knowing like, yes, I need to see this as this living organism that could constantly change. But at the same time, my brain wants certainty. And I feel like that's what gets in a lot of people's way, right? Of this is health, quote unquote, healthier or the better way of doing it. But this is also the way we want it, which is easy.
Yes. And, I'm going to pause and let that marinate with us really quick because, I'm a millennial, so I'm allowed to say this.
Mm-hmm.
But, for a long time, especially in my creative work, because I write children's books on the side and I'm suffering over one right now. In my mind, I often refer to millennials as a lost generation.
Mm.
And I draw a parallel to millennials and the lost generation of Hemingway and Fitzgerald in Paris expatriate community after World War One.
Mm-hmm.
And I draw those distinctions, number one, because I'm a literature fan. That's my bias.
Mm-hmm.
But also because, after World War One, what that community experienced was this deep disillusionment. They were coming into their youth at a period where the world was devastated and there was
Mm-hmm.
such hopelessness. And for me, speaking as an American, I was going to high school in 2008 when the economy substantially crashed.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Even just, being a millennial at that time, the messages from our culture were very work driven. Shows
Mm-hmm.
like The Office were coming out. The trendy stores were like The Limited, Express. So for millennials, we're always like growing up, pushed. And for a lot of us, we had this generation of parents. For me, it was Gen X.
Mm-hmm.
That really wanted so much for their children. Like they wanted more and better than what
Mm-hmm.
they had ever had before. And so it's this culture of pushing, not for everyone, but this culture of keep going. And then you have
Mm-hmm.
social media coming in where it's like, look, everybody else in your peer group has accomplished it and everyone has a flat stomach and they look beautiful and their ass is huge and
Mm-hmm.
it's perfectly proportionate. And as a woman, you need to look like that as well. Um, and I see how that affected my generation. And then you also have this dependence on pharmaceuticals and drugs in a
Mm-hmm.
way that, I can't speak for the rest of the world in the same way, but definitely here in America, this preponderance of overprescribing and looking at
So you're talking about
people.
like SSRIs, antidepressants, anti-anxiety?
I can't say that because
Okay.
I wouldn't hope to diagnose it, but I would just say more colloquially, especially on social media, the amount of content that promulgates self-diagnosis in our
Yes.
culture.
Okay.
Um,
Yes.
and it's
And
like,
I have something to fix it. Like you're feeling this way, so I have an elixir or I have a pill or I have
and
that kind of thing.
it's all in isolation, and that's really
Mm.
the only part that I'm commenting on truly, because every
Mm-hmm.
person is different. But this idea that we're all separate from one another and completely alone,
Mm.
that's something that I really saw happening in my generation. Because if we go to Gen X, there was a lot of commonalities. We
Oh
all
yeah.
did Vogue. We all knew
Yeah.
who Madonna was. I
Yeah.
cannot tell you who the most popular artist is in 2026 because everything is so fragmented. We are lacking
Yes.
unity as a culture. Um, and, I forget, did I answer your
Yeah,
initial
yeah, yeah.
question?
No, no,
All
no. It's
right.
because I love hearing all this from directly from a millennial because I know this from what I observed and what I saw, and I saw this. I saw this happening in real time. I'm like, oh God, you guys were all told about the American dream, didn't you? And it's not happening for you. Like this is very very different. Um, so yeah, it's very interesting to hear from someone who, was there and saw it and what it's like. And I also think that older generations don't get how much social media affects behavior. And one thing, one of the big issues right now is, the big thing is Gen Z doesn't drink.
Mm,
And again, I've heard from some people like a lot of these stories are a bit planted as a way of like protecting because people were buying a lot of alcohol in 2020 and 2021, and then the sales went down. But if you blame it on Gen Z, then it's the stockholders of these big alcohol corporations, right? So there's some of that, but it is true overall that Gen Z does not drink as much. But here's the thing: it's not so much they are drinking; they just don't drink out in the world so much. They drink at home because of social media. Because they watched a bunch of millennials post videos or a bunch of millennials out drinking, having fun, partying, which my generation we did. And then all of a sudden it shows up on a social media site or someone can Google it or right. And I think that's what we're seeing now is such because I think technology is moving so fast, it's almost like each pocket of a generation is like kind of reacting to it. Okay, this is going to keep us safe. I saw how they handled this. This is going to keep us safe. This is going to keep us safe. This is going to keep us safe. And I mean, I don't, at the end of the day, this technology is not going to end. It's going to keep going. It's not happening. I think that so much of it is about learning how to, how do we create more safeguards and systems and things where people are protected from a lot of this? Because I think that's a lot of maybe what is the feeling, right? Maybe a bit in your generation, like, yeah, you guys didn't protect us from any of this. No one ever thought this through and thought that maybe someone that was 15, 16 would get really drunk and post a video and then have a problem getting a job 5 years later.
Yes. And, we've been flitting back and forth between what I'll call like the personal and the professional sphere,
Yeah.
which is, it becomes so much more of a consideration for millennials and Gen Z because we've grown up in this place where
Mm-hmm.
you'll be prosecuted for something that you put up 10
Mm-hmm.
years ago. And you hit on something which, it almost makes me cry, like about this idea of safety and operating
Mm-hmm.
from places of fear. And they said it about millennials as well that, we're, I forget what they say, but like we're the cushion generation or we're coddled or something like that.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, you guys were the older millennials, especially everyone got a trophy. That was the everyone got a trophy generation. Again, I'd like to say that like everyone getting a trophy, the things that they started to institute, they blame millennials for that. It was the adults that did it. They're mad. They're mad because they gave you trophies. You know what I mean? It's a crazy thing. So, yeah.
Well, Tess, I just want to say, as a millennial, I never got a trophy, but I did win a jar of like Red Hots because I guessed correctly how many. So, I think, and I'm an odd millennial, and we discussed this before. I call myself a millennial that thinks like a boomer, so that makes me Gen X. And going back to the start of our conversation when I talked about my parents, I love both of my parents and I admired them so much. And because my parents were divorced, I never had any illusions. They were divorced since I was 3 years old. So I never had any illusion that my father was perfect or that my mother was perfect. That was not an illusion I was privy to.
Yeah.
But I still loved them. I still thought that they were taller than me, that they knew what they were doing, that they both had jobs, so they must know things. And even as I've grown up and more as you grow older, you see your parents as human, you understand the sacrifices they make. And I could tell you today, I still admire them because one thing that it was ever present, even when they were making mistakes, which, they made a few, is they always had a good intention behind what they were doing. And as much as they could, they would verbalize to me why things would happen. And I don't think that millennials or Gen Z, for that matter, are expecting a perfect world. I think they are, more than any other subset of people, immensely aware of the fact that the world is not perfect. I think what they're reaching for is maybe not safety, but just clarity. Like, tell us what it really is so that we can, to the best of our ability, prepare for it. I would just ask, a Gen Xer, my favorite one in the room right now, did your generation, from your vantage point, did your generation get a heads up about the way things were? Like, how was that boomer generation informing you?
I mean, I'm trying to think like, yeah, we heard stuff from our parents. My parents divorced when I was 6, like, same thing, like able to see them as human beings. But I'm trying to think back to it all now. And I think that what I've often said is that, boomers really came in with this idea of you can achieve the things that you want to achieve, but you just have to work hard for them. And maybe you can be happy. And I feel like the message that I got growing up was work hard for things and you'll be happy. And what I noticed with the millennials is it felt like they had taken the working part out. Like, not that the expectation wasn't that you would work hard, but it almost was you need happiness, right? So I really felt like from my parents in the older generations, which is happiness is not guaranteed. Like, you make your happiness. You control your destiny. You control your fate. And you decide these things. But as you get older, right, you realize more and more. One is you realize that we're forming our perception of the world and how we're going to be in it when we're in high school, in our childhood bedrooms. And the problem is that could be whatever we want it to be. So what happens is people get out into the real world and they're like, wait a second, I'm 35. I should be able to own a home by now. Because in my fantasies in my bedroom, and this is what my parents did, and right, that things get it's very easy for things to get skewed. So I think it's a combination of that. And then also just, I think this human nature, the humanness of us, which is we need to know what's going on. Like we don't like uncertainty because uncertainty is scary to us because that really that's the fight or flight, freeze, fawn. Like that's about our DNA because we're designed to survive. So much of this, we're really battling, I think, so much of our own DNA constantly of like, and so part of that, what's hard about it is you don't want to shame anyone for that. That's the humanness, right? Like that's okay to feel that way. But how do you then take that and move it and shift it and change it so that you're looking at it differently?
Wow. And, Tess, I don't pretend to have the full answer to that, but I do have a bit of a commentary.
Mm-hmm.
And it's an interesting one. I'm about to bring it from left field over here.
Okay.
But this is where the concept of a heavenly father becomes really intriguing. And just to examine that intellectually, if you believe in what we'll call heavenly parents or heavenly father is the popularized term, that's this like supposition of this parental being is what I'll call it, authority figure that is beyond oneself. And as a millennial that was always looking for, a version of approval, not because I'm insecure, but because that was just like growing up, checking with my parents. I respect them. I want to make sure I'm doing okay. Well, when your parents collapse, as they're wont to do when you're 32 years old, which and they start to be more and more human to you, that's where the psychological escape of like, I have a heavenly father and I can subscribe any qualities to that being. And I have this Holy Spirit mother figure. And these are new ideals for me to believe in. And whether it's not necessarily a theologic argument about does God exist, but it's more of a question of what is the function of God and a supreme authority in our society today. I would say it's giving someone something to believe in. And we could draw the statistics of like just how faith overall is increasing. And I see that as a positive because, in terms of purpose, when you don't believe in anything, you can't really believe in yourself.
Yeah. Yeah. So interesting. Well, I'm going to end it there because we went way over time, but tell everyone where they can find you, what you've got going on that you'd like to share with the audience.
Thank you, Tess. So myworkingsoul.com, that's where you can find more about me and my company, myworkingsoul.com. And if you search me on LinkedIn, I'd love to start a conversation with you about generations, about work, or just about purpose and who you are.
Great. Well, thank you so much. And thank you for listening to the Gen Mess with Tess.